Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Reclaiming Creativity podcast. I am your host, Grace Wong, and we're here to explore what it looks like to have a creative, healthy, sustainable practice for your creative professional endeavors.
How'd I keep from giving up all the uncertainty that looms?
Hi everyone, welcome to Reclaiming Creativity. I'm your host, Grace Wong, also known as suri.hy.wong, and I'm really excited to talk today about when I knew I was an artist. And I'm sure many of you are wondering the same exact question, when you can actually identify yourself, if not just to your own heart, but publicly, that you are an artist. And the first story I can think of is that in my early 20s, after I left conservatory, my friend Sarah asked me while we were catching up in Hong Kong, and I was depressed at my job. I was a teacher for music, English, and Bible at a local Hong Kong primary school. But I was starting to write a song for a singing songwriting competition that inevitably her husband sang in. And she just prompted me wondering, how do you know that this is the thing you're supposed to pursue? And probably at that time, I was about to move back to Chicago. I was quite determined that I needed to leave Hong Kong altogether, as well as my job, to pursue singing songwriting. And I could honestly say at that moment, I don't know. I mean, the songs keep coming. They're just in my head and they're sitting there, even when I don't ask for them or want to, as if I'm kind of like a messenger. And it was true that when I won the singing songwriting competition in Hong Kong, that kind of was the seal of approval, not only to me, but my family. I was hearing songs just being on the MTR when I was just jotting down ideas on Notes app, recording on voice memos, and then rushing to my choir room at the school I taught at to hash out ideas at the piano, layer vocals just on top of my voice memos. It was a very minimal situation, and yet I was able to seemingly miraculously create something that won. And I think that testimony is almost what you can take back for yourself, is that you probably also keep having a stream of ideas that flood your brain and they wake you up in the middle of the night. And that could be a season or it could be a lifestyle, but it is a compulsion and an impetus, and you want to express it. I want to say you also, as an artist, want to find beauty in everything and make beauty out of everything. And if you don't express that thing that's inside of you, you're likely to be depressed or sick or cynical or a shell of yourself. And at this point in my career, I can say that being an artist does not equate to being a professional. And it doesn't even mean that you're the utmost trained, famous, or excellent person. It's just that you're consistent and you're persistent, regardless of where you're at, how many resources you have, and how you're being perceived. And you can call it something of a purpose. And I know purpose is such a big word, so I'm going to break it down in the ways that I've learned in my own faith tradition. And in my church background, there's always been this debate discussion about the balance of divine calling and the desires of our hearts. And I will say now, I believe we need to have both, and they're not mutually exclusive. Like what you want inside of you is not mutually exclusive from what your higher being is promoting you to do or leading you to do. Because back in the day, I used to think those things were at odds. And if I was to be an artist, that I would be utterly selfish. And yet, songs were like gifted to me. And when I shared them with the world, people were impacted, and I could see that. And I don't want you to find your identity in the validation that comes from outsiders. But I also think it is helpful to know whether or not other people are responding to what you have put out there. But regardless of what that feedback is, an artist finds joy in creating and pursuing art. And joy in the storms, in the flow, in the goodness of manifesting and birthing out concepts is an indicator of a skill and a gift, and I would say calling. And I differentiate joy from happiness. And happiness is not bad. I think it's terrific and oftentimes euphoric, but it's also not always there. It's also fairly fleeting. But it's what we're taught and trained and oftentimes wanting to chase in this material world, right? And in a material sense. But I believe joy is something that is so much more profound, sacred, significant. And it can be this like mixture of, at least for me, a relief, a rush of exhilaration, some satisfaction, some pride. And it contributes to a deeper love for the thing that you're creating, the people who are on the other side of partaking in the art, of existing. You're like growing in deeper love for something when you practice. And that's like the most ideal version. Obviously, if you are an artist who creates and expresses very, very hard themes that often are full of conflict, you might not have a sense of that joy that leans on the happiness spectrum, but you might have a sense of satisfaction and pride and duty, and that helps you get through things when they're tough. And I think that tenacity and that persistence is what separates someone who might not identify as being an artist to someone who does. And that persistence is also what separates you from the thought of, do I just need a rest and take a break, or do I need to like scrap this altogether and find another calling? But if you're an artist and it's an identity and it has less to do with professionalism and even production, may I say, I want to say the doubt that you are one might never fully leave, but you need to believe that when you're not fully practicing, that you're still an artist and you still have that identity to fall back on. And I want to confess that even up to a few months ago, like in the last episode, I told you that I had to leave an old job. And during one of my meetings with my colleagues, they kind of looked at me stunned when I said, I think I need to pursue my calling as an artist. And I said this actually to multiple colleagues, and they were all baffled. And the funny, strange thing is they were with me in the ministry space at a university, and something that's underpaid and overcommitted, right, as a job. And even they were just absolutely concerned about my well-being, admitting that, because it's in this world, in America, in a capitalistic society, it's hard to survive as an artist. And that's the narrative that I grew up with in my home as well, with my Asian immigrant parents. That's not to say every Asian immigrant parent is like that. I'm starting to find more who have not been that way. But I grew up with this story, even though artistry ran in my bloodline, especially on my mother's side. It was told to me that it was superfluous, irrelevant, luxurious, selfish, shameful, unnecessary, and waste of space. And because of that, I resisted it inside of myself. And I was trying to see if I was going to transition into creativity, but more in the marketplace and commercial sense of, just being a marketer, a copywriter, that kind of thing. And I've transitioned into that, but not without this hope of, hey, the music is going to come back. I'm going to finish my memoir. I'm going to continue exploring baking, macarons, dancing, going back to dancing. And so there is this persistence that exists. And it has to be cultivated, to be honest. I think the more that you cultivate your abilities, your skill sets, you're going to feel less deflated. Because you can keep producing, right? Whenever you are ready to. Persistence can look like reinvention for some of you. It is looking that way for me. And obviously I labeled a bunch of things that I dabble in, now being baking. And, at one point I didn't have creative writing in my background, but now I do. And went to get my master's at Cambridge with it. And sometimes it's simply practical. I was waning in my health, and I stopped training like I used to in the conservatory, and was losing my athletic ability as a pianist, and just the tension that existed in my hands was deflating. And so I transitioned into writing songs, which not many pianists necessarily do. Not many classical pianists, I want to caveat with that. And I imagine dancers go through the same things, at least the ones that I've talked to, they know their physical limitations. And even as they age, they have to really stick to a physical training routine, classes, and otherwise to be consistent and to keep up with their stamina. But many of them eventually go into teaching class, choreographing instead, and leaning into different types of dance. But when you're reinventing yourself, I think it is really helpful because you get to see beauty very differently in the world. You get to experience beauty in ways that get you out of the box that you're stuck in oftentimes. And you get to see yourself and the people around you in a very different light. And that realization is part of the process, right? Artists are super aware and sensitive to not only the product, but the journey of making that product. And there's an argument between different camps whether the product is more important or the process. And both are important to me, and I can't necessarily quantify it. But I think you have to appreciate and respect the process, even if it's grueling for you. And hopefully it becomes more of a sign of joy in your life again. Again, it's not necessarily happiness, but there is this peace, there is this hope, there is this like elation, there is this pride, satisfaction that comes from going through it. Because every artist also knows that there are so many layers and elements of unpredictability, ebbs and flows, and you can't control everything. Not the tools you have, not even yourself. There is a point of discovery that happens from your imagination to the materialization of that idea. And you also are likely to be surprised by your own result. And you can bridge that gap a little bit as you get better or as you become more on demand, especially if you are creating in a corporate space or something like that, right? You have to bridge that gap a little bit more efficiently or that kind of a thing, or you're working on behalf of a client. But I think the soul of an artist is, hey, I'm willing to let the unknown make its way into the final result. And I'm also willing to let some rawness and some imperfection enter in as well, because it just ends up being too technical or pristine of a result. And there's like the science of composition, and that tethers us to the reality, science of composition and craft. And then there's the art. And if we're leaning into art, then its interpretation, its lens will be affecting us in the heart and in psyche and in the subconscious. And I think the soul of it can be felt. And I would say, even if you're not qualifying yourself as an artist, but you're a creative and you're doing creative marketing work, right? A lot of creative marketing work has a lot to do with sales, and sales has a lot to do with empathy, and empathy has a lot to do with understanding yourself, but the other. And if you're able to exist in that space and find the soul, I believe that ends up making an authentic and trustworthy product in a way that other people, it's like something that AI couldn't possibly make. There's a human element that's there, that's undeniable. So my question to you is, if you're asking me what made me an artist and wanting to know that side of the story, to find yourself juxtaposed with it or finding yourself relating to it, and I'm asking back to you, what makes you an artist? Regardless if you can answer that question, why not just become one? What stops you if you're so interested already and you're making it to the end of this episode? And what makes you so emotionally invested already that you can't see yourself as one? As a coach, I've trained pedagogically and philosophically in the belief that everyone can and anyone can if they're willing and they want to and they're dedicated. I also believe everyone is intrinsically creative. And I think it's rubbish and stupid that society dictates or predicts the success of any individual at any age. And I believe that limitation is induced. I think it's the manipulation of shame, fear, and control, and someone's insecurity, many people's insecurities. It's the attack on maybe potential giftedness, but the fact that if anyone can do it, that's an insane amount of power, isn't it? And I don't know why people haven't tapped into their potential. I cannot judge their circumstances. It could be trauma, it could be access to resources, it could be the wrong teacher or the wrong teaching method, and someone not knowing someone's learning tendencies and proclivities. It could be a whole host of reasons. But I will say, I saw that my 40-year-old student, Michael, was able to achieve an intermediate advanced level Mozart sonata after 2-3 years of practicing. He was a day trader and a dad, and he never had piano before that point. He just practiced every day. It was his introversion time. He put on his headphones and he was diligent to it, and he loved it. And did he play at my level, the conservatory level? No. Did he have all his fundamentals down by that point? No. Did he play to Mitsuko Uchida's level? No. Was he like a genius and a prodigy? Not necessarily. But he was dedicated, and it was incredible to see what he was able to achieve in such a short amount of time. And it was because of Michael I was inspired to go into creative writing. And I didn't know if I would make grad school. I didn't even think or believe or imagine at that point. I didn't even know what Cambridge fully was at that moment, if I'm being honest. I just had a story, and I was going to find every single way I could to make it come alive. And as a teacher, I knew how to scaffold elements of like mastery and project manage myself to step up my game. But when I started writing my story, it only sounded like blog posts. Like, it didn't sound like publishable literary quality that would end up in a master's program. And so, I just want to encourage you that you never know, and you just have to make a commitment to yourself that this is who you're becoming. And if not, it's just going to keep haunting you. That story that you have embedded in you, that sound, some things are wordless, like that image, that idea, like it's going to keep haunting you. That flavor, those textures, those recipes. So just start somewhere. And I think that's what separates the artists from the non-artists. It's that drive, the intention, the diligence. Inevitably, it's those who put themselves out there and execute. And it doesn't even have to see the light of day. But at least you're exploring. And at least you've gotten something out from your imagination, birthing it into the material world. And if you need help, that's where someone like me comes in. I'm the coach who can help you get out of your head, get out of your own way, ask the correct questions. And I'm the kind of coach who's not going to manipulate your point of view, your worldview. I might just ask more questions and give you some techniques so you can elevate what it is you're trying to say. But I'm not going to change what you're going to say necessarily at its core and at its heart. And if it's not me, I really hope that someone else can be at least your witness, if not your promoter, And if not, your workshopping community, because it's hard to consistently do it alone. And oftentimes you do need community to encourage you in the process. And this is how I continue to have faith that I can keep going. My feelings go up and down about it, but just know that you're not alone. And soon when we release those interviews, you will know even more so that you're not alone. But thank you for joining me for this episode on when I knew I was an artist, which means how do I know that I'm an artist? And we'll see you next time. Ciao, ciao.